Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking your time. If you're based at least on the Pacific West Coast, joining us this evening for this workshop. I hope you guys find it enjoyable. For those of you that weren't at the last Zero Waste workshop, my name is Christine. I'm a sustainable lifestyle and blogger and author. So my blog name is called Simply by Christine. You can find a lot of tips there on simple and sustainable living. And I also authored the book Sustainable Home, as Lisa was mentioning. So if you guys ever are looking for information from this workshop, a lot of it can be found on there. You can find other suggestions too on sustainable living. Otherwise, I just want to really briefly share my background as well. Besides doing the blogging and the authoring, I'm also doing marketing at our local zero waste store here in San Jose. It's called The Source Zero. We're open if you ever are looking for zero waste goods or stocking up on things like soaps and shampoos in your own jar. I also have experience in corporate packaging sustainability. So if you guys have any questions about that, feel free to type those in. Otherwise, as Lisa mentioned, we will have specific portions during the presentation which will be taking questions. So continue to feed those questions in the chat box and we'll try to answer some of them as we take breaks along the way. So with that, today we are going to be learning a little bit more about how to have a more zero waste kitchen. And this is actually the first place I began my zero waste journey, even before I began to understand what zero waste was. I have a background in packaging and I took a course on food packaging with my food science program at my school, and it really changed my perspective about food waste and how we can really apply a lot of the industry principles in our own home to reduce waste in many different ways. So we're going to be tackling food and packaging waste for the majority of this presentation, as quite a bit of our waste actually comes from that area. And then we're also going to have two demos, and I'll share a couple other swaps as well throughout the presentation that I have here at my table that helps my kitchen stay more low waste. So the first area we're going to tackle is food and packaging waste. And before we even jump into the how-tos, I do want to give a brief background as to why this area is so important. So this was a statistic that I share every time in my Zero Waste 101 workshops, and it's that Americans make up 5% of the world's population, but produce about 40% of the world's waste. And 40% of that waste comes from food and food packaging. And it was these statistics that really just sparked a light bulb in me when I was studying packaging in college and made me think, as a packaging student, as someone that has the potential to work in this industry, what am I going to be doing about that? And why is there so much food waste and so much food packaging waste that's all going into our local landfills? So to put it into a different perspective, the average US citizen wastes 238 pounds of food annually, totaling $1,800 per year for a household of 4. So I hope this kind of illustrates, I guess, the impact that you can have on the planet, but also on your wallet too. Hopefully, as we share a few different, or as I share a few different tips on building a zero waste kitchen, you'll be able to save money in the long run and just be more practical and just save food along the way. So before we even get into a bit more, I want to go ahead and share what happens to things as they go to the landfill. So this is one picture of an active landfill. This is where our trash goes every single week. And essentially what happens is a compactor, which is a kind of bulldozer, tractor-like vehicle, it goes over this active landfill and compresses as much stuff as it can into that area. Once it's filled up, it becomes an inactive landfill. It's covered with old concrete, building materials, and dirt. But one of the most shocking things for me when I was learning about, where our waste goes is the fact that organic waste doesn't actually degrade in landfills. And the reason is because things are so tightly compacted by the machines so that there's very little oxygen. And then when they're covered up, there is no UV light that allows things to decompose organically. So this is a picture of carrots that have been sitting in a landfill for a matter of months. And as you can see, they're still the same shape, but they have become this black kind of toxic substance, and it's really unfortunate when organic materials go into our landfills and kind of sit there just waiting. They actually decompose anaerobically, which means that they produce methane gas, which is 25 times stronger than carbon dioxide. So landfills are a big culprit amongst other methane generators in the world when it comes to producing greenhouse gases, and food waste is definitely contributing a lot of these methane gases in our landfills. So yeah, definitely shocked me, because I think there's definitely this assumption that when you throw things away and you give it to someone else to take care of, you don't have to think about it. But just seeing pictures like these make me realize that we do have a responsibility, and we should be doing something about it instead of, letting someone else take care of the problem. So with that, here are a few tips to go ahead and start reducing waste in your kitchen. The first one that I always recommend is pretty practical, pretty simple, but when you are about to go grocery shopping, shop your pantry and your fridge first. I know this might be a no-brainer, but it really helps me to plan my upcoming grocery shopping trips when I know what's in my fridge, what needs to be finished, and then I can plan and structure my list and my shopping list around the things that are about to spoil. Because oftentimes if we just go to the grocery store without much of a thought, and then we buy a bunch of things, that's gonna push everything that's old into the back of the fridge. So you might not even remember that something old is in the fridge and is about to go bad, Another tip or hack that I learned from a friend is that she actually has a box in her fridge which says use me first. So if you just periodically continue to check what's in your fridge or in your pantry, you can put the things that need to be finished first into that box. So it's kind of a visual reminder for you to get those items used first instead of throwing them out before after it's too late. So the second tip I have is in regards to when you're actually going grocery shopping. This is a haul back when I was able to go to a grocery store and bring all my containers. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now, and I'll be talking a bit more about that. But I just want to mention that in regards to purchasing things with less plastic and packaging waste, going to smaller grocery stores and also farmers markets is probably going to be your best bet right now. At least here in the South Bay area, we do have quite a few farmers markets opening up. So it's nice because you're in an outdoor area and you can shop for your produce there. And many of the farmers there will allow you to use your own bags to bag different types of fruits and veggies, so you can reduce your plastic bags. And you can also bring your own reusable tote bags too for everything else. Otherwise, if you do go to a conventional grocery store and they're telling you that you have to use a plastic bag, just ask them to put it straight back into your cart or into your basket, and you can bag it yourself as you bring it over to the trunk of your car, or if you're going to bike home with your groceries. You just don't want to let the workers be touching your own reusable items, since that's something that they're very conscious about. However, there's also hope. I have heard recently in the past 2 weeks that a group of scientists are actually coming together to prove that a lot of these reusable containers, they don't really transfer COVID nearly as well as respiratory droplets. So they're actually making a case for cities like San Francisco to implement the plastic bag ban again, so that we are using less plastic. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, I think there's a little bit of hope there, even though a lot of the zero waste grocery shopping stuff that we used to do before, if you're used to parts of this lifestyle, it's slowly coming back. Otherwise, I do have some other tips in regards to shopping for groceries online, because there are some more zero waste options coming out. The first is pictured here. It's called the Wally Shop, and they're based in New York, I believe, and they're working on opening a second distribution center so they can have a more efficient supply chain. But they ship to all 50 states, and you can get dry goods such as chia seeds, pasta, flour, rice, oils as well. That's not a dry good, but you can get a lot of those things in reusable packaging, and you can send those empty containers back for them to reuse, sanitize, and refill. So that's a really cool option. You just have to pay for a packaging deposit, and then that is returned to you as soon as the package goes back to them, and everything is good to go. So that's one option. I also want to mention that if you want to get out less, I have been also trying out Imperfect Produce, which is really great. They work on actually reducing industrial food waste. So know there's waste in your own home, but there's also waste throughout the supply chain, up the stream, and at least in the food industry. A lot of types of produce, they have certain cosmetic standards. So apples need to be a certain size, maybe to fit in a type of package. Carrots can only look a certain way and whatnot. And all of these so-called ugly produce is thrown out, and it's a huge waste of food. So what organizations like Imperfect Produce does is they work on salvaging these produce items that would otherwise be wasted, and they sell it at a discount to people like myself who want to support this movement of reducing waste. So that's another great way to reduce waste, even though it's not within your own home, and to really contribute to a more zero waste economy. And last but not least, there is one more if you're based in the US. It's called Azure Standard. They don't sell things in reusable packaging, but you can get a lot of dry bulk goods like flour, rice, beans. You can get those in paper or compostable packaging, which is really nice. So if you don't want to go the jar route, but you know that you go through rice or pasta really quickly, you can always get just a really large paper bag of it, make sure that's clean, and recycle that bag after, repurpose it another way. So that's always an option if you don't want to go the reusable container route. All right, so once you come home with your groceries and you're trying to figure out how to store things and preserve them, I've learned actually a few things through my experience as a packaging student about what we can do to keep our food fresher. But this first one is actually very simple. It's a very general rule of thumb for produce. Fruit, such as peaches, apples, any types of fruit, they will produce something called ethylene gas. And ethylene gas is what causes fruits to ripen. But unfortunately, if you put them next to other vegetables, that also speeds up their ripening process. So I always recommend just splitting the two. That's a general rule of thumb. You get more in the specifics by Googling how to store or separate and categorize your produce. But at least storing and separating those two will really help decrease or make the ripening time of your vegetables a lot slower. So that's one tip there. So this picture right here is kind of a demonstration of all different ways that you can store your produce and different methods to do so. But I guess the general rule of thumb, something I learned from my food science course, is light, oxygen, and water and moisture. Those are some pretty big factors that actually allow bacteria to grow in our food, which causes food spoilage. So if you can remove those things, that can help preserve your food and keep them fresher for longer. This is general. Note that because there are some types of produce that actually need moisture to keep them fresh. And we'll start on the left side. As you can see, there are some green scallions and some parsley and cilantro, which are sitting inside a jar of water, and that helps to keep them crisp and kind of rehydrate them because no one likes wilty cilantro or herbs. I'll show another example of how you can also rehydrate vegetables, but there are certain veggies that do well in water. So that's one way to help preserve them and keep them fresher for longer. The next jar is a little jar of coffee right there, as you can see. This is just an example of using glass. I always recommend using glass over plastic containers because glass is the least permeable of all the packaging materials. It's the most recommended in the packaging industry to keep oxygen from going into the foods and keeping them fresh. So trying to find any properly sized container that can reduce the amount of air of at least within the jar, that's a really great way to make sure that your food stays a bit fresher. So it can be any jar. I mean, mason jars you can usually find secondhand. You can repurpose a pasta jar. There's a lot of different ways to go there. This jar in the middle, it's a jar of veggie broth. We're showing an example here of how to freeze food, because freezing food is another great way to also reduce waste. In the case you made like a big batch of curry or soup or broth or beans, anything. Those types of foods are typically the ones I will like to freeze because they freeze pretty well. But the idea is that you should be able to use any jar, but it's always recommended if you can to opt for a jar that has more straight size or a wide mouth. But if you are filling it up, especially with liquid and soups, to never go above where the shoulder of the jar is. And the shoulder is essentially like the rounded part before it narrows and hits the cap. Otherwise, because that liquid will expand and then that will cause the glass to break, which is no fun. So if at all possible, just fill it a little bit less just in case, and that will really help to prevent any glass breaking. I also like to just label the top of any of my jars that I'm freezing with the date that I put it in, so I have some sense of like when I put it in there, otherwise I lose track. So the next jar on the third one with the carrots and the cucumber is an example of pickling. So when you lower the pH of your food by adding acid like vinegar, pickling it is a really great way to preserve it and keep it lasting longer. And I know that for me, cucumbers, they go bad pretty quick because they're filled with water and moisture. So I like to slice them up, add some carrots, a little bit of sugar and vinegar, water and salt and some chili flakes. And it's a really simple way to pickle veggies for a side dish or a yummy banh mi sandwich. So that's one way to also keep your veggies lasting longer is by pickling them. And there's different ways to do so. The way I do it, I don't cook the water or anything, but it lasts me about 2 weeks. And last but not least, this is a very simple example on the very right, a little glass bowl with a plate on top. So whenever you can, if you have leftovers or something that doesn't have a lid, just try to cover it with something as simple as a plate, a pot lid, or we're gonna be actually tackling a demo of beeswax wraps later. So that's a really cool option, but simply using a plate will help keep the food fresh. Otherwise, there's oxygen all throughout the air and in the fridge that will interact with your food and cause those microorganisms to grow and make your food spoil faster. So those are a couple different ways to reduce food waste, all in this one picture. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about packaging and how to reduce packaging waste as well. So I mentioned a few of those different sites and options for zero waste grocery shopping, but there's no denying that sometimes we have to buy things in packaging. So I like to usually opt for these types of materials in regards to when I get packaged goods. The first is just regular paperboard or cardboard. As long as it's clean, I can flatten a box like that or a bag and recycle it, or I can repurpose it too. The second is cans are very highly recyclable as well. So metal cans. The third bottle right there, that is plastic. So I don't often like to use plastic because it leaches into our foods. After studying plastic packaging, there's actually a pretty big concern in regards to the plastics that we're using and the plasticizers or the chemicals that are placed inside of them. So when at all possible, I try not to use plastics, but sometimes we don't really have a choice. So what I do is I actually opt for certain types of plastics, in particular numbers 1 and 2 plastic. And the way that you can tell what type of plastic it is by looking at the little triangle, usually at the bottom of the bottle or jar, whatever it is. And that's called the SPI code. And an SPI code will tell you what type of plastic it is. Numbers 1 and 2 is polyethylene, PET. Number 2 is high density polyethylene, HDPE. Those are the most recyclable and most high in demand throughout the world. So I usually try to opt for those, as I really hope that my plastics are getting recycled. And all the other ones have less of a chance of getting recycled, so just be aware of that, or try to find an option that is that can treat those plastics in a recycling stream somewhere. Otherwise, the last jar right there, that is glass. Glass is very recyclable as well. I just recommend for all of these materials that you make sure they're clean and washed and rinsed, and that will give them a higher likelihood of actually getting recycled. But if you are confused and if it's confusing in your area, I just encourage anyone, whatever municipality you're in, know that like every single town has a different way of recycling. So check with your town, with your waste hauler, and see if they have some sort of chart or diagram to tell you what goes where, and then hopefully that can help you sort out what's actually going to be recycled. And then right here, this is a example of composting. So let's say you do have food waste. So I actually use a bin like this to compost with worms. And it's been a little bit of a journey for me. I actually am running into a hiccup right now. But worms are a really great way to compost food scraps like eggshells, produce scraps, anything except for meat and dairy and bones and oil. All of that you cannot compost with the worm bin, but it's a really great way to compost in a small space, and it actually doesn't smell at all. So the idea of vermicomposting is that you have a certain species called red wiggler worms, and they eat 50% food and 50% brown matter. So that could be dead leaves, that could be newspaper, as long as it's not bleached, brown paper, egg cartons, things like that. So you have to put a mixture of that, keep the environment fairly moist, and they eat their weight in food every week, and they also multiply. So the idea of this particular worm bin is actually, so they'll start at the bottom tier, you'll fill it with food, they'll eat it, and then as you stack it up with more food in each tier, they go up through each tier, and you can retrieve the compost, which is their castings or their poop, on the bottom, and it's really great fertilizer, and just do a rotating system. But you do not have to get such a fancy worm bin like this one. You can also make one for probably less than $10 from a plastic bin, so that's also another option. And there's also other ways to compost too besides vermicomposting, in the case you're not looking forward to having worms in your household. The first is a compost tumbler bin. A lot of apartments will have these, or people that I know that are into composting, they like to put it on a balcony, just somewhere outside, and it's the same kind of methodology as this, except because the compost tumbler bin is black, it attracts heat from the sun, and it can create an environment that's warm enough for microorganisms to go ahead and decompose everything in there. And then the other way that I've personally done is when I first started living in zero waste, I actually did this very simply with my parents. We just started digging holes in our backyard, and we would put produce scraps in there. And the cool story is that we had an orange tree that never bore any fruit, and we decided to dig some holes next to that orange tree, put some produce scraps in there, and let it compost, and it provides nutrients and really revitalizes the soil, which is so important because as we take a lot of nutrients out of the soil to grow our food, it's important to put it back too. So we did that with the orange tree, and the next year they had some really great oranges, and it was really cool to kind of see that happen and to see that cycle of life as well. So that's another way to do it, but there's a lot more and a lot of great videos on YouTube, and you can search it up on Google on different ways that might work for you. So know that these 3 examples are just a few of them. Okay, so before I continue, I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can tackle a few questions. Lisa, could you help me with seeing if there's any particular questions that are coming up that are the most common?
Sure. Okay, we actually have a few questions.
Okay, thank you.
One person was wondering where you got some of your statistics at the beginning of your talk, and whether you can share the sources for those.
Yeah, so I will need to search back and share some of the sources. I believe the fact that the US makes up 5% of the world's population, that probably came from a book called Garbology that was published in 2012, I want to say. And so those first 2 stats I got from that book, and also from a sustainability professor that had come in and talked to the students that I was learning with at my college. The other one, I believe there is a food waste report that's out that was recently released. I'll have to find the exact link for it, but yeah, I'll try to post it somewhere.
Okay, yeah, you could email it to me, and I can email it to you.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and then Rocio has 2 questions. She said that where she goes to shop in farmers markets, they have to use their own bags, and they won't allow her to use her bags. So she's wondering, and so as a result, she's taking back home a lot of plastic bags.
Right.
If there's anything that could be done about that. And then a second question is related to composting. She wants to know, I guess in her community, there's no composting, and she wants to know if it's possible to make it happen at the community level.
Yeah, for sure. So in regards to the plastic bags, that's a tough one. Usually when people offer me plastic bags, I just see if I can decline it, if at all possible. But if that's something that's being mandated by the farmers market through COVID, it might be a little bit difficult to fight what the authorities are saying. But you can search up the articles that are coming out regarding that reusables are actually okay to use now, and try to keep them updated or educated on that, if anything. Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one, and it's not always the funnest when people aren't supporting you for doing the right thing. But in regards to composting, of course, reach out to your local government. The dream would be is that the government can provide municipal composting for everyone. That'd be really cool. So that's an option. Otherwise, you could also maybe try reaching out to your local farmers market, like the head of them, and see if they have any connections with local farmers to set up a composting system. I know they are doing this in New York where they have a compost drop-off. Otherwise, if there's like community gardens, maybe you can start a coalition, start contacting, connecting, and seeing if there's a way they would also take produce scraps for their own compost too. Yeah, definitely, it would be nice if the government could handle it all for us, but you never know what might happen if you reach out to some of the people in your community.
Okay. And then kind of related to the first question about the statistics, somebody wanted to know where they could get the links to some of the sites that you mentioned. And again, you could just email me some of those sources and I can send it out. And then another question about recycles. Somebody mentioned that they try to buy pasta in the cardboard boxes, but a lot of times there's like a little plastic window where you get to see what's inside. And they're wondering whether that can be recycled still.
That plastic is most likely not going to be recycled, but the box will be. What happens is that when any paper gets recycled, they will process it and they'll take out anything that's not paper. As long as this majority of it is paper, should be okay. If you want to be like the extra super good citizen, you could peel off the plastic and dispose of that, but that's really up to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then somebody asked, they said that avocado trees grown from seeds won't bear fruit. Is that true?
That is true. Yeah, I know. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. The reason why I grew the avocado plant from the seed is because I think it's a really cool process and I think it's a beautiful plant. If you do want to have a avocado tree that does bear fruit, you have to place it next to a female avocado tree that does produce fruit and let them cross-pollinate. I believe that's how you do it. But I personally just really liked watching the process and I thought it was really fun to see it grow, and it's a cute little plant right now, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, Roseanne is asking whether, she'd like you to talk more about keeping produce fresh.
Yeah, I'm actually going to tackle a bit more on that when I cover sustainable swaps. So I'll talk more about that later. So hold on to your questions and we'll try to answer them at the end too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to keep going. That's okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So with that, I'm going to go into a really quick demo about repurposing food scraps. And as I had answered before on that question about the avocado plant, this is a picture of my avocado plant, which is much bigger now. But it's really cool to see how when you harvest seeds from your produce or repurpose food scraps in certain ways, to kind of watch them grow. And especially during this time where a lot of us are inside, it brings me a lot of joy to kind of see these things come back to life. So I'm going to actually show an example that's not the avocado seed, but I have some scallions over here, and I'm going to show how you can really simply just regrow them from scraps as well. So what you're going to need are veggies such as the green scallion. You could use even celery works well for this, or romaine lettuce, and there's so many cool food scrap videos out there. So if you're inspired by this, I encourage you to look online too. You'll also need a bowl or a jar, some water, and some sunlight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put this, I'm sorry, my table is filled with all sorts of things I'm going to be showing you guys later. So let me go ahead and put these out of the way so we can make a clear area for this demo. Okay, so right here, we have a cutting board, a really small 1 ounce jar. It could be any jar, but I like a shorter one for the scallions because you don't need that much. So right here, we'll talk more about this bag later, but I have some scallions in here. So let me pull them out. Okay. scallions that also need to be used. So I will be using them soon. Alrighty, so it's really simple for scallions. All you have to do is, I would recommend cutting about an inch off. So I'm just gonna take, I'll take 3 of them and I'll cut those 3. So all I have to do is take probably like the white part. So it's gonna be about an inch. Just go ahead and slice it. And you go ahead and just put it into this jar. I don't even know if 3 will fit. Actually, it will. Okay, perfect. So most likely the ones that have plenty of root development at the ends, those are going to do a lot better. But what you'll do is you simply put it into the jar, like so. And then you're gonna fill it up with water, maybe about halfway, just enough to cover the roots, and just put them by a window with sunlight. And that will allow the roots to develop, and you'll notice that the middle of the scallion will start growing up. And the key with growing any types of produce scraps is, I found that if you don't change the water, your roots will rot, which is not very fun. And just make sure that as the roots develop, keep the water fresh and clean. And when things are growing and they seem to be developing and the root system seems pretty strong, then you can transfer it to soil so that it has nutrients to go into there. One thing I'd also recommend, if you're doing this with romaine lettuce or celery, I actually like to pull off all of the outer stalks of the celery or the leaves of the lettuce and let it be a very small, like just a small root in the middle. You also just have to, you can cut off maybe like about an inch of the celery, but what I found is sometimes I've cut off the whole thing with all the outer stalks, and all those outer stalks, they rot in the water. So I would just recommend taking all of them off anyways, just cooking them, and then just using that very narrow part on the bottom. So very, very simple way to grow your own produce from produce scraps. And there's also, again, a lot of other tutorials online. So I'm gonna keep moving. Let me bring this computer back. All right. So with that, I'm gonna talk a little bit, actually, I might as well keep the, I'm gonna keep this over here. So I know, I think it was Roseanne, she was asking about sustainable swaps and how to store produce as well. So I'm actually going to stop sharing here so you guys can see me a bit better if I can find my mouse. That is always a problem whenever I use Zoom because I can't quite see it. Hold on, give me one moment. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and kind of show a few things on this table that I use and have kind of swapped out to make my kitchen more sustainable. Let me quickly check the time, 7:36, okay. Before I jump into that, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 200 degrees Fahrenheit because I'm gonna prep it for the beeswax wraps. So give me one moment to do that. All right, so back from our little intermission, before I jump into all these sustainable swaps, I know when it comes to living a zero waste lifestyle, it can be really tempting to want to just buy everything, but I always recommend use what you have first until the end of its life. Otherwise, it's a waste to throw those things out when they still have potential. And if you can, to also buy secondhand items too. So let's jump into the keeping produce fresh. So I know I had mentioned keeping some produce in water, and here is one example. I don't want to spill it. I have carrots, which I just place into this metal tin in a bed of water, and it keeps them crisp for a very long time. So that is a way I keep my carrots fresh and not flimsy and wilty. So that's one way to do that for carrots, or I believe you can do it for like a daikon radish as well. This bag right here, this is really great because, yeah, some produce will need a little bit of moisture to keep them fresh, and this particular guy is called a swag bag. It works really great for herbs such as cilantro that gets really wilty, green scallions, excuse me, and also spinach or romaine lettuce. I just got this today, it's falling apart. But it keeps it really crisp and fresh for, I think, at least a week, which is a lot better than if you keep it in a plastic bag. And it does this by providing just enough moisture with this cotton muslin fabric, but it also like kind of absorbs the moisture too, so it's not too wet. Because if you were to put like lettuce or spinach into a plastic bag, there's a lot of condensation, and you can see around those wet areas, that's where the lettuce gets really wilty and kind of slimy and gross. So this is called the swag bag. Again, what you do is you just simply place your produce items in here. You roll it up like so, and then place it into the crisper drawer of your fridge. But before you do that, you can spray it with a little bit of water. You can wet it just under the sink very lightly, and you want to keep it just fairly damp, and it'll keep your produce really crisp for a long time. So I think this is a great way to keep spinach and romaine lettuce staying fresh, especially because those things are often the produce that spoils the quickest in my fridge. So that is a swag bag. But honestly, even using like a simple tea towel might be able to work too. Or using a tea towel, or even like a cotton produce bag like this. I love putting anything like kale or cauliflower or just hardy greens into bags like these with just a little bit of moisture, and that also keeps them staying fresher for longer. So that's what I do for produce. Let's go into the cooking section. So this is, let me bring it over. This is my cast iron skillet. It's not mandatory, but one of the things I definitely learned when I was studying plastics is it's present in a lot of our cooking tools and kitchenware, especially in Teflon pans. And when you use them over time, they will start to leach into your food. And then when you notice like the flaking, that's especially bad. But what's nice about cast iron skillets or ceramic skillets or stainless steel even is that they're just pure metal and they're food safe for sure. And a lot of cast iron skillets you can actually buy secondhand and restore them by scrubbing them down and seasoning them in the oven. And what happens when you season these cast iron skillets in the oven is that you just want to coat them with just some regular oil, wipe it to the best of your ability so that it's not like super drippy. And then you want to put the cast iron pan upside down in the oven for some time so that the oils can absorb into the cast iron. It becomes essentially almost like a non-stick skillet. But it's the key to using one of these is also to not use soap when you wash it. So I think that's always something that catches people off guard, but it's a really great tool, and I love how sturdy it is, and it's really good to use. The other thing is I always recommend using wood, if at all possible, wood and metal for your cookware. So avoid plastics if you can, because that it's not stable, especially at hot temperatures. So you want to use something safe like wood in order to cook. And the other thing with wood is that you'll notice that this particular spatula, it's splitting a bit in the middle. You want to condition your wood every few months, and you can do that just simply by buying a jar of walnut oil and just using any reusable rag and just kind of wiping it into the wood, and that will help keep it from splitting and staying too dry. And that can be applied to a lot of different types of wood items in your home. Okay, so let's go into this really quick. If you're into nut milks or making tofu from scratch, which is actually pretty fun to do, you can use a simple cotton cloth like this or a t-shirt, or you can go a little bit fancier. I'm sorry, this is so gross looking. My husband has been using it for coffee. These are nut milk straining bags or reusable coffee strainer bags. So they're just made out of cotton, and you can compost them at the end of life. But even just a simple rag just like this that's a little bit thin is perfect for making nut milks in a blender, then straining out the pulp if you don't want it. And make sure you save the pulp because it's really good for things like granola bars and cookies and whatnot. So that's one other kitchen swap right there. If you are into baking as well, there's a couple different options. I use compostable parchment paper for a few things, but these right here, these are actually silicone baking mats. So the important thing to know about silicone is that silicone is not the same. Like there's different types of silicone, and it's also not plastic. So there's a lot of, I did write a blog post for the company that makes this. They're called Simple Ecology. You can find the blog post on there about the different types of silicone that are out there. But the idea is that you want to look for the highest grade silicone, which is called platinum silicone. And platinum silicone can be recycled over and over again. So that's the key to do it. Otherwise, regular silicone usually has added plastics, and that cannot be recycled because it's mixed. So these are like the Silpat baking masks. They can be recycled, at least with this particular company, which is Simple Ecology. Otherwise, some other silicone is like this particular bag. This is called the Stasher bag. It's also made from platinum silicone, and they also have a program where they recycle this into like playground pellets on the ground. But these are really great if you like to cook sous vide, or if you're looking for an option to Ziploc bags. So they're freezer safe, they're microwave safe. So the great thing about silicone is that it's very much heat safe, which is quite nice as long as it's good quality. And it's a great option if you are looking for something that's a bit more lightweight, not as fragile as glass, and it's a really good option for kids, and they have many different sizes and colors too. Speaking of compostable parchment paper, this is also a cool brand. I've been using them for a long time, and sometimes silicone doesn't quite match the texture of paper products when you are baking. They're called If You Care, and they're compostable baking cups, and they have other cool products that are a bit more eco-minded in regards to just household goods. Okay, and then this guy right here, this is what's called a stainless steel tiffin. I got this as a wedding gift from my in-laws who are Korean, and it's traditionally used in Korea to store kimchi, so it's very much leak-proof to keep the smell out, because kimchi, when it ferments, it's quite stinky. But I love using this especially for storing things like bread. It's a bit of an investment piece, but I found it to be really helpful in getting like large quantities of items on the go where I need to store them. I've also used it at the farmer's market if I want to get like a large tray of strawberries and I don't want the plastic punnets. I'll just ask them to dump all of the strawberries into here, return the punnets so they can reuse them, and then also reduce plastic from there as well. And then for cleaning, so here is a compostable bottle brush. This is a way to clean jars and bottles made out of, like, I want to say beechwood fiber and bamboo. I could be wrong, but at the end of life, you can compost this. It's completely natural, and I've had this for probably almost 6 years now, and it's still going strong. But if you have one, again, just feel free to continue using it. This right here is also a compostable dish scrubber. So just made out of sea salt and bamboo, I believe. So you can compost this after you're done using it. And this right here, I'm sorry, it doesn't look as clean anymore, but it is a reusable alternative to paper towels. It's called a Swedish dishcloth. And what you can do with this is you can use it like a paper towel, but you can also continue to reuse it by washing it in the upper rack of your dishwasher, and that helps to keep it clean and sanitized. So those are some options, but there's also a lot of other cool kitchen products out there for cleaning. I just don't have all of them right now. Otherwise, this last thing I want to show is how I filter water. These are activated charcoal sticks, and they're made in Japan. And what happens is they heat the wood to a very high temperature, and the charcoal is able to absorb impurities of the water. And as it absorbs over time, you have to actually refresh it every month by boiling it in water and kind of flushing everything out for 5 minutes and letting it dry again. So I use this to filter my water. It lasts 4 months, and then at the end of its life, I can compost it. I can use it as a deodorizer in my fridge, or I can even put it at the bottom of like plant pots as well to help drain things as well. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen really quick. Okay, going back. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pause here for questions. I'm going to start moving to the kitchen. Lisa, if there's any questions, I will go ahead and take them right now. I'll take a sip of water.
Okay. Yeah, there are a few more questions. Somebody's wondering whether, is there a way to share food scraps with neighbors who compost, like through Nextdoor?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, if you have a neighbor that does compost, that's a great option, I would think, to do it. There are sites online too. I can't remember the name, but it could be like Share Your Compost or something, but there are people that are willing to take compost out there. I just can't remember the exact site name, so I apologize for that.
Okay. And somebody is wondering whether some cities give out compost worms, like Milpitas.
Oh, they might. I don't know what specific cities actually give them out for free. I've usually seen that they have to be, or like they sell, like companies will sell them, but I think I've heard of certain cities, I don't know if this is locally, but they give out free worm bins, or they're very open about sharing how to compost with worms.
Okay, yes. I think the master gardeners have people who could also
Oh, cool.
point people in the right direction.
Yeah.
Um, somebody asked, how do you recycle paper shreds?
Paper shreds. I think you can just recycle it as is, if I'm not mistaken, but if you are unclear on that, I would just go ahead and ask your municipality or get in touch with someone that works at the waste management in your area.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah asked, how would you recommend removing stubborn food stains on cloth produce bags and stasher bags?
Ooh. So I'll probably cover this in the cleaning workshop, which is coming up next. But I currently use a laundry stain stick, and they are more concentrated, like cleaning bars that you can get from different companies. I know Bestowed Essentials, they're based in the Midwest, they sell one. Juniper Seed Mercantile also makes one, they're based in Colorado. And we sell them at the Zero Waste store here locally as well, and also online. But I use that to kind of scrub on certain areas. And whenever I do get food stains, I try to tackle it as fast as I can. Like if I'm at a restaurant, I will just go to the restroom and just like add some soap and water to my shirt. I mean, that's better than nothing. But yeah, usually those laundry stains, if they help lift the stains. But I mean, I think when you come across like chocolate or coffee, those are a little bit tougher to get out without bleach.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the brands of the bottle brush and dish scrubber that you showed?
Yeah, so the bottle brush is from the company called Redecker, but there's other brands out there that are also selling it. You can check on thesourcezero.com. That's our website for the Zero Waste Store. We ship throughout the nation if you want to buy through there. Also Zephyro, they're another brand that we sell, that they're the ones that make the dish scrubbers. But Redecker, they actually cover a lot of those compostable dish brushes or brushes in general.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How would you recommend storing a loaf of bread in the freezer?
Oh, that's a good question. I think beeswax wraps would actually be a really good bet for that, in combination with maybe another paper bag or the tiffin like that. I know it's an investment, but if you can find something long-term, that would be a really good option. But the beeswax wrap, they have different sizes where you can make one yourself, but wrapping the bread in that will definitely help.
Okay. And where can people buy the Japanese charcoal?
Oh, so that brand, they're called Kishu. They sell on their website. It's on Amazon. You can also get it at thesourcezero.com too.
Okay. How would you recommend freezing soup? They used to freeze it in Ziploc bags, and they find that it's difficult to get it out of glass jars.
Yeah, I would still recommend doing any sort of glass jars. You could use a stasher bag too, or like any Tupperware. Usually what I do when I do have to use anything that's frozen is I'll try to defrost it the night before in the fridge so that all that cold air can be used in the fridge as well. But if you do have to use it, it does take some planning. I like to put it, if I have to use it like right away, into just a bowl of water. That usually helps to speed up the freezing process, or the unfreezing, the thawing process.
Okay. Okay. And then somebody named Cedric mentions a website called makesoil.org. Maybe this is in reply to one of the other questions about composting.
Perfect.
And then somebody asked, can you compost nylon nut bags?
No. So nylon is a plastic, so it's not technically compostable. There might be certain organizations that take back nylon, though, to compost, but nylon can't be composted, from my understanding.
Okay. Another attendee suggests an organization called Share Waste that lets people share the compost.
That sounds very similar to what I had heard too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what should we know about compostable bags, supposedly compostable bags?
Yeah, so it's a little bit tricky in regards to like industrial compostable food packaging or any types of bags. Usually these companies try to make them out of just agricultural products like corn. So you've heard of like PLA, it's a corn-based plastic. And technically it will degrade, but not all bioplastics are made the same, and they don't all compost at the same rate either. If you do have a PLA or some sort of bioplastic, you probably won't be able to compost it at your own home. It's called like backyard compostable because it needs to reach a certain temperature, and it has to be in that temperature for a certain lifespan in order to degrade. I think you don't have to quote me on this, but there's a certain time period of how long municipal composting businesses, like how long they keep the stuff there, and I think it's a span of 3 to 6 months. And a lot of those bioplastics, they can't compost because that's not long enough for them. They need much longer to compost, and unfortunately they have to pull these out and landfill them. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. So if you do have composting municipally in your area, I know there are people that have been able to volunteer with them in the East Bay, like in Berkeley. That's really cool, and they kind of pick out and see, oh, this is a bioplastic thing I've used in the past at an eatery, but it actually doesn't compost within the time at least. So you can always ask them, like, what compostable items would you not recommend that I should avoid?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then somebody wants to know how to dispose of used deep frying oil.
Oh, that unfortunately is not something I'm particularly well versed on because I don't often deep fry stuff. I don't know if it can. Obviously, it shouldn't be composted in your backyard or a worm bin for sure. I think most municipalities will say you have to put it into a jar and landfill it. If your municipality does allow composting, though, technically they should be able to compost it because they can take any sort of grease. But I would always check if you are looking for more specifics in your area.
Okay. And then let's see. Manuela says deep frying oil. She thinks you could put it in a container on your blue bin and then they pick it up. Huh. Yeah, I guess it's best for people to check with their specific waste management company. Mm-hmm. And then Kim wonders where she can find the cotton bags for green.
Yeah, there's so many. Yeah, I personally have purchased mine from Simple Ecology. You can go to simpleecology.com. We also sell them at the Source Zero as well.
Okay. All right. That's it.
Cool. All right. Let's finish off this workshop with a little DIY. These are beeswax wraps right here. You can buy them. You don't have to make them on your own, but they're also really fun. Do note that a lot of companies that make them, they also add additional ingredients besides beeswax to make it a bit more sticky and adhere to your surfaces a bit better. But the idea of a beeswax is it's a more reusable alternative to saran wrap. So you can use it by just putting it over any container, and with the heat of your hand, it just kind of molds and covers, any bowl, dish, or a half-cut fruit. So that's one way to keep your produce fresher for longer, or just leftovers, or you can even put like sandwiches and snacks in here. So it's really cool. This is one that I purchased from a company called Bees Wrapped, but there's a lot of people that make them maybe in your area because people love making these by hand. So you can always try to hunt some down. So the idea is that it's just made out of beeswax and cotton fabric, and technically it is compostable at the end of life. So you could just throw it into your compost bin, but something I like to do is I just like to refresh them with a bit more beeswax. If you are more wary of living a plant-based or vegan lifestyle and you don't want to use beeswax, you can also use, I believe it's candelilla wax. I could be pronouncing it and butchering it. So there's other vegan options out there, but this is the most simple way to do it because it only needs one ingredient. And yeah, so you can refresh it. You can make it from just a cotton rag that you have on your own. And what you'll need is an oven. But if you don't have an oven for some reason, or you want an easier way to do it, you can also use an iron. And I'll talk about that second method right after I put this into the oven. What I have here is, actually I'll put it down this way. I have a baking sheet right here. I have some parchment paper, which I'm actually reusing from the last time I made the beeswax wrap and I refreshed it. So I still have some leftover beeswax on here, which is perfect. I just folded it up and put it in my freezer. I'm just gonna put the beeswax on here. And you're going to go ahead and you're gonna need some beeswax. And I pre-grate it because it's kind of a mess to grate it. I would recommend, if you can, to get it in pellets because grating it gets it all over your grater, and then you're gonna have to melt it in the oven and get it off, so that's not very fun. So you just have to put a little bit over the top, really not that much. And if you do have extra, it's gonna land on the parchment sheet, and you can always scrape that off after it cools and use it for later. But essentially what happens is that when you put it into the oven, this beeswax will melt at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, probably even less. And you'll notice that it becomes a bit more shiny, and you'll see all the beeswax will disappear. And then you'll take it out as soon as it looks like it's completely saturated in that beeswax liquid. So I'm just putting just a few on here. You could even open up the oven and kind of spread it around with a utensil. Let me just show you guys how much I put on there. It's really not very much at all. I don't know if you can see, just a little bit throughout. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop this into the oven just on the top rack. And the idea is that you have to keep an eye on this for the next like 2 minutes. So I'm gonna keep my oven light on and just really check like every 30 seconds because you don't wanna leave it in there for too long and not let it burn. So I'm gonna let it melt in there for the next few minutes. I'll keep an eye on it. But if you want the easier way of not using an oven, let's talk about the ironing. So you could take an iron, 2 sheets of parchment paper, put the parchment paper on top of that setup that I put in there, and then use an iron to just go ahead and melt, smooth out the beeswax wrap. And then that's pretty much it. So that's a really easy way to do if you don't want to use an oven, but I'll show what happens after I take it out of the oven. So while that is waiting and I am glancing back and forth, are there any more questions?
Yeah, somebody asked where they can get the beeswax pellets.
Yeah, I'd recommend going on Etsy. Etsy is a really great place to find local makers and even like local beekeepers. And a lot of them will sell beeswax pellets, and you can usually customize your order and ask them to ship it without plastic too. So that's one way to do it.
Okay, and I know that at the Saratoga Farmers Market, there is a honey vendor, and they do have beeswax as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, there's a lot of people that produce beeswax around here.
Okay. Okay. And how, somebody asks, how can you clean beeswax wrap so that they are truly clean?
Yes, it's really important because beeswax does melt at a hot temperature to not wash it in hot water. You can do it in mildly warm water, but recommended to do cold water and just soap. Beeswax has antibacterial properties, so you shouldn't worry about it too much, but yeah, soap and cold water is the best way, or mildly warm water is the best way to do it. That's a good point. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there's no other questions.
Perfect. Yeah, so that is what you'll need for this. I totally forgot to bring up this slide. Yeah, let me take a really quick peek. Okay, it's like about halfway there. All right, so I guess we've covered most of the questions. I'll still be here if you guys have questions as this beeswax wrap is working on melting a bit more. I just wanted to say thank you again for participating in this workshop and just hearing my story and the things that I'm really passionate about. And if you do want to connect again, my Instagram handle is Simply by Christine. That's also my YouTube channel, and you can go to simplybychristine.com for my blog and a lot of other guides and resources on simple and sustainable living. Otherwise, yeah, I'll be in touch with Lisa about getting some of these links out to you so you guys can remember and check out a couple of different products or stats and figures on food waste too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christine.
Yeah.
I appreciate your talk. And the next talk is in July. Is it July 20th?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the next talk is July 20th. Please go to our website, sccld.org, to sign up for it. Okay, thank you.
Great. I will stay on here if there's more questions though, and I'm just finishing up the beeswax wrap too. That
Okay. Well, it looks like there are a few more questions.
Okay.
All right, let me see. What type of dish soap do you recommend?
Yeah, so there's actually a really cool invention called the dish soap block. That's really cool because it's essentially like a cube of dish soap, and you can use like that scrubber and use friction and water, and it creates suds. So that is a great way to reduce the amount of plastic that is produced for all the liquid dish soap that is out there. I personally use what I can get in bulk at my local zero waste store, and it's from the brand called Ecos. So I use that personally, but the dish soap block is really great. There's a good one made out of coconut oil from Bestowed Essentials as well, but there's other brands out there too.
Okay, great. And then let's see, somebody asks, what do you use to wrap pastry dough when it needs to rest?
Ah, yes. Probably a beeswax wrap would do it, or I will just use like a damp tea towel as well. When I do make bread, I usually just also put it into a large bowl and cover it with a plate and keep it in the oven to keep it warm.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked, what sort of fabric should you use? I'm not sure what that was in reference to. Okay. And somebody also asked about the recording for this. This program was recorded, and we'll make it available on our YouTube channel, Santa Clara County Library District YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page.
My beeswax is about halfway melted.
Somebody asked, what do you use for meat to rest on rather than just tin foil, it's aluminum foil?
If my family ever marinates meat, we usually will bake it. So we just put it into any sort of like Pyrex, like a glass pan, just like so. We'll use that, and we can use the beeswax wrap is also safe on meat too. Just make sure you clean it with the soap and the water. Otherwise, this is another cool thing as well. Also from Simple Ecology, it's a silicone lid. It can be recycled with them as well, and you can just cover like so. Yeah, so that's another option too. Otherwise, you could be even more thrifty and just use a regular pot and lid. That could work too. If it's just plain metal, it should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then will the beeswax wrap remain sticky? And would you recommend adding other ingredients besides beeswax?
Yeah, so for simplicity's sake, I like to just keep it with beeswax, but it might not be as sticky. I do notice that it doesn't like hug the surfaces of bowls as well. So I know some people will add like tree resins in there, but I haven't personally looked into those specifics, but you can try to research a couple different recipes online too.
Okay. And what do you recommend to replace napkins and paper towels?
Yeah, so for paper towels, the Swedish dishcloth is one, but honestly, one thing that I always use is old t-shirts. I just cut them up into rags. It's not the prettiest thing, but it's a great way to repurpose clothing scraps, and yeah, you can just reuse and wash them. For napkins, I just use whatever napkins my family does. My parents, they just never use cloth napkins at home, but they always had a set. So I just took them from them. They're just made out of cotton, I think. So yeah, I use these actually to carry around reusable utensils on the go too. So that's what I would recommend. Just anything made out of natural fabric like cotton, linen, hemp. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the question about the fabric was in regards to the beeswax wrap.
Yes, use a cotton fabric.
Okay.
100% cotton. All right, it's done melting, so let me pull it out really quick. Actually, it needs like a minute. Let me let it bake just a little bit longer.
Okay. I have a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay. If one eats meat, what's the best way to purchase it at the butcher counter and avoid taking the plastic?
Right. Okay. So, all right. Sorry about that beep. That was the oven. Yeah. Typically, those stainless steel tiffins is what I use. as long, I know it's going to be tricky with COVID still, but what we would do is we would bring those tiffins to the butcher and we would ask very nicely with a smile if they could put it into our container. And usually at most Whole Foods, at least within the South Bay area, they're more than welcome or more than willing to put it into those large containers, or even like a clean Pyrex, just show a nice clean container and have a smile. Otherwise, if like a large chain like Safeway or Whole Foods or Lucky's, if none of those really work out, I would go to a smaller business and see if, and call beforehand and ask, can I bring my own container if it's clean? And are you willing to like put the meat in there for me? The thing to note, every single butcher is going to be doing it a bit differently, but if they have no idea how to do it, what you can tell them to do is to put the container on the scale and to tare it, which means they zero it out so that you're not paying for the weight of the container, and then to put the meat in and then print out the tag from there. Otherwise, they could just weigh the meat separately and then put it into the container after it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you use expired baking soda for anything?
I don't use it for baking, but I'll use it for cleaning because it's a good abrasive for cleaning like kitchen sinks, counters, and other like grimy areas.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you use to pat meat dry?
Oh, that's not one area I actually know very well about, actually. So I wouldn't know. I guess I know a lot of people have asked me about like using paper towels to pat fish, and they don't want like a sticky, smelly rag that smells like fish or meat. So I'd recommend just finding some sort of compostable napkin or paper towel. That could be one option. There's a company called Who Gives a Crap. They make recycled paper towels, I think with like 50% recycled content.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
How would you get the oil out of cloth napkins?
Laundry stain stick is definitely one thing. I'll talk a bit more about it at the next cleaning workshop as well, but washing soda is another great ingredient that you can use. Your baking soda also cuts grease really well too.
Okay. All right. That's the last question so far.
Great. Okay. So the beeswax wrap has now come out. As you can see, it looks kind of wet because all the beeswax has melted on there. And what you're going to do, just be careful because it's pretty warm. You're going to just grab it by the corners like so. And then I'm going to just move this up just a little bit. I'm going to grab it by the corners. It shouldn't be too hot, but just still be careful because it's warm. And then it should be completely covered, and just wave it back and forth until it completely dries. And that's it. So I'm just going to be waving this for like the next 30 seconds until it dries. As you can see, this parchment paper, you might be able to see, it has a little bit of beeswax on there, so I'll just save it for the next time I do this. I'll just keep it in my freezer. And then this should be refreshed and good to go. Yeah, it's pretty much, it's still a bit warm, so I'm not going to put it over anything, but that's how you do it. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I love the live demos.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And any last questions before we log off for the evening?
Let's see. Oh, somebody asked, is the wax only on one side?
It's actually on both, because what happens is the beeswax will seep through the cotton fabric.
Okay.
So it's interchangeable. You can use it on both sides.
Okay. And is the fabric kind of a loose weave, or is it?
No, it's a pretty tight weave. I'll try to zoom up a bit. It's just any cotton fabric that you'll find at any fabric store, I would say. It's nothing, yeah. It looks pretty standard to me. Okay. It is on the thinner side. Like,
okay, yeah.
Like a standard
like
t-shirt is too thick. Like that's too thick, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, I somebody asked, how many times can you reuse the beeswax wrap?
Oh, I just reuse it until I notice it starting to crumble, and it usually takes me like, I want to say 6 months of using it. I don't know how many times that is, though, to be honest.
Okay, that's a pretty long time, though.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you worry about dyes in the fabric?
I don't know about this. I trust this particular brand, but I would, if you can get undyed fabric, that would probably be a safe bet.
Okay. Alrighty, I think that's it then.
Great. All right. Really awesome questions, everyone. And thanks again for spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you, Christine.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.